Good evening, everyone. Happy Lag LaOmer to you all. As the 10th minister of Shearith Israel since the revolution, it's my great pleasure and privilege to welcome you here, celebrating 360 years of Jews in America and celebrating David and Becky Nathan. And we have a very special program for you tonight. We'll have words of tribute from our Parnas, Louis Solomon. Then we will have remarks from Rebecca Nathan. And then we will hear from Aaron and Daniel Nathan. And then words of tribute from Rabbi Hidary. And then remarks from David Nathan. And then I will deliver brief remarks, following which, as part of a partnership between Shearith Israel and Beit HaTfutzot, the Museum of the Jewish People, there will be a hard-hitting, meet-the-press style interview with our honorees and myself. So we begin with our Parnas, Louis Solomon.
Thank you. Rabbi, thank you very much. And on behalf of my co-officers, Michael Lustig and Michael Katz, and the whole Board of Trustees, let me add our thanks to all of you, not to them, for being clever enough to have the Nathans in our lives. So I wish everybody congratulations and very well done. Is someone having trouble hearing me? Shall I speak up? Okay. First, a few words to all of the Nathans except David. Not much to say. I actually think that you're all very cool. Becky is cool. David's mother is cool. David's father was cool. I knew him, and I'm telling you, he was cool. David and Becky's kids are very cool. There's a slight indiscretion about Yale that I'm going to pass for now. Not a big deal, but David's not cool. David is not cool, is he? See, he's not. So why is he so dear to us? And why do we cling to him? And I've actually thought about that a lot. I'm going to try to give an answer, but to answer it, I need one question first. The question is, why do we, in particular at this synagogue, we're not the only ones, have this love affair, this obsession with how long we've been around? I don't mean 10th minister. I don't mean that, because that would be disrespectful, and I'm not trying to be that. I mean that, you know, they've been here 5 generations, 6 generations, 16 generations. Okay, why this obsession? All right, let me tell everybody a secret. I'm going to let you in on this. I have it on fairly good authority that everyone, virtually everyone in this room, had an ancestor around 5, 15, 16 generations ago. I could be wrong, but I think let's take it as a useful operating assumption that we all had ancestors around. So why do we sort of feel that is so significant? I'm going to try to give you an answer, and I'm going to try to use David as sort of the exemplar. 3 little vignettes. One is quite personal. I believe that one of the reasons we obsess over that is that David is a torch through time, and the Nathans are torches through time. And we are able to rely on them because of their glimpses of the past, which we don't have, as a way of seeing how to get to the future. First little vignette. I have been on the board for too many years. In case anybody doesn't know, I am the Parnas who wasn't ever able to do what David was able to do when I succeeded him. So that's in case I needed that introduction. But for, it's not 16 generations, but close to 16 years, I have been dialoguing with David, discussing things with David, disagreeing with David. David was senior to me first as a trustee and then as Parnas when I became Sagan, for a dozen plus years. Innumerable dialogues, innumerable disagreements. The number of times that David pulled rank on me is exactly 0. The number of times that there was any rancor, any heatedness in the discussion is exactly 0. Anybody who knows me will see, look, even if I were a reasonable person, that would be a feat on his part that nobody else I know in the world could actually do. But if you know me just a little, you know how magical that is. Okay, how truly a treasure that is. That is his personality. That is how he deals with people. I was his co-equal from day one. He was never Parnas when I was Sagan. We had lots of problems, including Peter, by the way, who's not here, Peter Neustatter. Imagine being his Sagan. And we had a lot of things to do. And he's done an enormous amount that I hope other people will talk about. That's not what I want to talk about. But him as a personality, that is the best I can do to give you my own personal glimpse. And now I have 2 others. The first is not 16 generations ago, but I think 160 generations ago, was in fact David's namesake. David's namesake, please don't correct me, Rabbi, when I'm wrong, not David, but Nathan. And in the 2nd book of Samuel's, we learn how that first Nathan had to go into David, the king, a man who knew war, who knew power, who lived by power, and explain to David that the way that you kind of embrace sort of the pantheon of Jewish leaders was not to have an adulterous affair with your neighbor's wife and then send your neighbor off to war so that he would get killed. And since that's what David did, it was left to Nathan to go in and explain to him that that wasn't perfect. And I commend it to you. Read it, and you will see sort of the lightness of touch, the effectiveness without needing to pound tables of David's primogenitor, or at least his namesake. So that's my 2nd story. And my 3rd story relates to a piece of the Talmud that, in fact, it was our daughter 4 or 5 years ago who was in this synagogue explaining to the synagogue how in the tractate of Megillah, there is a story. And the rabbis asked, what do you do with a blind man? Is a blind man allowed to say the prayers leading up to the Shema? These are prayers that extol the beauty of the physical universe and God's grandeur in the physical universe, something the blind man cannot see. So the question is, well, can he lead the congregation in doing that? And the answer the rabbis came to, quite enlightened, was yes, he could, because he got actually benefit from it. And the story they tell was of a man, a blind man, walking down the road with a torch in his hand. And one of the rabbis came to him and said, "My son, you are blind. You are not seeing anything with that torch." And he said, "Rabbi, that is true. But with this torch, I light the way so others can see when I'm about to err." And that is the torch through time that I see in David and in the Nathan family, because they see the past and they have a torch and they let the rest of us who are quite blind see our way. Thank you all very much.
Welcome, everybody, and thank you for coming. I especially want to thank everyone who planned this really lovely party, especially Barbara Rice and her team. And I hope that you will all stay after the program for dessert and to enjoy some more of the music. We're here to celebrate 360 years of Jewish presence in America as a congregation, and also the unique history of the Nathan side of David's family. We'll be hearing about this in the rest of the program. The story of my own Jewish history, which I will confine to my very brief remarks, is of things coming around in a circle. My father was the son of Russian Jewish immigrants to Canada. My mother is not Jewish. I knew almost nothing of my own family history. Unlike David's close and affectionate relationships with his grandparents, I hardly knew either set of my own grandparents or anything about the lives that my father's parents, whom I called Bubby and Zeta, that was about the extent of the Jewish content of that part of my life, they lived back in Tsarist Russia. Knowing very little of that history, I also knew very little of Jewish life. When I met David, I was surprised to find ourselves talking about conversion as we got more serious in our dating life. But when I got to know Ruth and Edgar and Sarah and the rest of David's large and wonderful family, the idea of affirming the importance of Jewish values began to make a lot of sense to me. My life was circling back to a historical tradition that almost got interrupted and ended in my generation, and then it didn't. Sticking with this theme of family and of generations, I want to expand the picture of family life that is such an important part of David's history at Shearith Israel. You will be glad to hear that the David that you all know, the David in a top hat, is not the only David Nathan. David also wears many other hats. There's the lawyer's hat, but I'm not referring to that. I mean the bicycle helmet. I mean the warm winter hat for cross-country skiing on the lake, the Mets hat for playing ball in the park, the gondolier hat for stand-up paddleboarding, and even an ice climbing helmet for hiking over glaciers in the Canadian Rockies. At these events, it's customary to read letters from public figures, a tradition, of course, that dates back to the George Washington administration. But instead of reading a letter from Senator Schumer or from Governor Cuomo, I'm going to read one, a real one, that came from someone who knows David in a different hat. In that sense, it is particularly meaningful, and it may even embarrass David a little bit, but I hope in a good way. Dear David, congratulations on the honors, that's spelled H-O-N-O-U-R-S, being bestowed on you this evening. From the perspective of our relatively young Western Canadian mountain culture, the thought of your descendants and synagogue being in North America since 1654 is fascinating. All the best to you this evening, and I look forward to seeing you this summer. Signed, Larry Stanier, Mountain Guide, Canmore, Alberta. It seems that 360 years of family history in America has not stopped David from becoming a respected citizen of Western Canada. I've touched on many of the elements of David's life tonight: his family, Shearith Israel, his connections to Jewish life in New York. I'm sure there will be more discussion of this in the rest of the evening. But the point of all of this is very simple. They are all ways that David connects with and enjoys the most important things in his life: his family, his friends, and his community. I am so lucky to have David in my life and to have circled back to my own Jewish history in this community. David and I both feel incredibly blessed to have been able to raise our 4 boys here in this congregation, and we are looking forward to many more years to come. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Sorry, I promised to be loud, but I'm also going to be brief. I'm Aaron. I'm the oldest of Mom and Dad's 4 boys, and I am here to represent the youngest of the many, many generations that we're talking about tonight. I can't help but start by remembering my grandfather, who, as Parnas and then as Parnas Emeritus, would have and was, of course, very, very proud of the job that my dad did as Parnas. And Dad, as you know very well, he would have been even prouder to know that you're retired. As it turns out, no matter how many years your family has been a member of a congregation, like everyone else, you still have the experience of joining the community for the very first time. And my brothers and I each had that experience for ourselves some point between 1987 and 1993. And since then, it has been an utterly loving and meaningful and spiritual experience for all of us that I don't think has anything to do with the fact that our ancestors have been here since 1654. I think it has everything to do with the fact that the four of us were born now and have had the pleasure of being a part of Shearith Israel today, when it is a thriving and vibrant Jewish community that has welcomed us and taken care of us. And you can probably tell where I'm going with this. I feel that a lot of that is a tribute to the work that my dad has done with all of you over the last many years. My first memory of this congregation is actually when my grandfather retired as Parnas and returned from the banca here to sit with us in our seats. I think I could read at the time, but I don't think it had occurred to me that he actually had a seat over here. But I never had that illusion about my father. I knew that that's where he belonged because he tended to bend the rules a little bit when it came to being able to spend a little extra time with us during services. And that is just one of many ways, a minor one to be sure, that my dad has made sure to renew even the most sacred of traditions and protocols so that this congregation and the people in it could continue to have a warm and meaningful relationship with it. I have one other example of this kind of generational change, which is why I have a Siddur up here with me. And it actually has to do with a book that I always love to go and pull down off the shelf at my grandparents' apartment on 92nd Street. The last time I did this was at Seder a few weeks ago. And it's a Siddur. It's a Siddur that this congregation used roughly 250 years ago. And I always flip open the page to the prayer for the government, which includes an English translation. And it begins exactly as you probably know it. He who dispenses deliverance unto kings and dominion unto princes, and so on. May he bless, guard, preserve, and protect His Majesty King George III and Her Royal Highness Queen Charlotte. Now you have to imagine that at some point in this congregation's history, in our family's history, and the families of a lot of people in this city, that became very unpopular very quickly. And like a lot of other things about our community, it changed. And we can still go and open that Siddur very carefully when we want to. But I think that when thinking about the history in this place and in our family, the lesson that I learned growing up with my mom and dad is that much like the maxim at the Seder that we all read last month, that in every generation each of us is obligated to see ourselves as though we went out from Egypt, that the motto that my dad lived by as Parnas was a little bit different. And that is, sort of write this, Bechol dor vador chayav Parnas, or something like that. But in every generation, a Parnas is obligated to see himself as though he were entering the congregation for the very first time. And that is the principle that my dad has lived by in this congregation, and it has given me and my brothers, and I hope all of you, an experience that we can never thank him enough for, but we can try tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron, for those beautiful words. I'm sure I'm not the only one that sees a future Parnas working up the ranks. Just this morning, a bunch of us had the privilege of going to visit Chatham Square Cemetery, our first cemetery dating back to 1683. During the ceremony honoring the veterans who fought in the American Revolution, one of the descendants of Chaim Levy played taps on the trumpet. Dr. Freilish and his son wore their military uniforms. Rabbi Soloveitchik decorated the grave of Simon Nathan, and I had the privilege of saying a hashkava for Reverend Gershom Mendes Seixas. It was a truly inspiring and beautiful event. As we were walking out, I turned to Barbara Rice, and I told her that being in this graveyard really makes history come alive. It's ironic, but true, that we feel most alive, not when we stand alone as individuals, but when we feel like we are part of something greater than ourselves. So as we stand here today and celebrate 360 years, twice Chai times 10, of Jewish community in America, we feel especially proud to be part of this vibrant congregation. And as we count up to Shavuot, when we receive and celebrate the Torah at Har Sinai, which happened just about 3,600 years ago, we feel doubly honored that we have received the Torah from our parents and commit to fulfilling it and passing it on to our children in turn. Because we revere our ancestors, we revere the Torah, not simply as a historic relic, but because the values of the Torah, the very same values that inspired the patriarchs and matriarchs of both this country and the Jewish people, remain at the center of our lives every day. As the prophet Micha summarized it, what is good and what does God require of you? Only to do justice, to love goodness, and to walk modestly with your God. David and Becky, you embody these values every day in everything that you do. I'd like to illustrate this with just two stories. I wrote up some of my thoughts in the program that you have, and you can read that later. But here's a couple of things that I didn't include while I was writing. This is kind of the Pirush Rashi, the oral Torah on what I wrote. So I wrote that when David dons his morning suit and his top hat and walks up to the banca, I feel like this entire sanctuary, already glorious as it is, has an added atmosphere of gravitas and warmth. What I didn't write is that David doesn't particularly care